I don't know if you've noticed this, but something strange is happening at Manchester United. All of a sudden, we look competent in the transfer market. Man United have already wrapped up the signing of Matheus Cunha from Wolves. We are a step away from signing Bryan Mbeumo from Brentford, and Bruno Fernandes has turned down generational wealth in an offer from the Saudi Pro League. But why? One of the main catalysts for this change at Manchester United is our new permanent director of recruitment, Christopher Vivell, bringing with him a new transfer philosophy that has seen him become one of the most successful transfer operators in all of Europe. Known for his track record of bringing in youngsters and turning them into world stars, Christopher Vivell is one of the biggest names in transfer recruitment, but most people don't know who he is. So let's find out. Who is Christopher Vivell? What is he bringing to Manchester United? And why, after all this time, might there be a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel? So Christopher Vivell is Manchester United's Director of Recruitment. He reports to Jason Wilcox, United's Technical Director. This means he is playing a big role in who Manchester United sign, and already we can see a shift from previous seasons at Manchester United. Let's have a look at what Christopher Vivell has done in the past. His CV is pretty simple. He started off at Hoffenheim when he was still a player in the German 4th Division, working as a video analyst, a scout and a match analyst. Then he worked through the Red Bull Group, which is where he really made his name, starting off at RB Salzburg for 5 years as head of scouting and sports coordinator, then moving on to Leipzig for 2 years as the technical director and squad planner. Then he went to Chelsea for 12 months as the technical director before leaving and joining Manchester United on a temporary basis that became permanent in February of this year. It was really his time at the Red Bull Group that cemented him as one of the most talented eyes in scouting, bringing through the likes of Karim Adeyemi, Dominik Szoboszlai, Josko Vardiol, Benjamin Sesko and Erling Haaland, to name but a few, and selling them all on for massive, massive profit. And he doesn't just do it one way. There are a few tools that he has in his arsenal that makes him be able to develop these players the way that he does. One of the common themes that we see from Christopher Vivell is the use of feeder clubs. When he worked for RB Leipzig and RB Salzburg, they would continuously use FC Liefering. This is an Austrian second division team where the likes of Dominik Szoboszlai and Adeyemi went for multiple years to gain that professionalism, to gain that experience as a top level footballer. And this is something that Manchester United used to do. This isn't a new idea. In the 90s and early 2000s, United would send players to Royal Antwerp amongst other clubs where they would go and they would get that professional experience. It's a good way to take them out of the limelight of the Premier League, to take them out of this pressure of having to be a 17, 18-year-old playing for Manchester United, allow them to mature, to become proper footballers, and then you bring them into the first team when they're actually ready to compete at the top level. And this is something that Christopher Vivell did and has done throughout his career. And funnily enough, United already have a club that would be absolutely perfect for this. Ineos already own FC Lausanne in Switzerland. They're a top division side in Switzerland, playing against the like of Young Boys, a Champions League team. This would be the perfect place for youngsters to ply their trade. The likes of Sekou Kone has already been linked with a loan move over to FC Lausanne Sport. It's the perfect level of professionalism, very high level football, but not that same intensity that you're going to get in the Premier League. This is already ready-made for Manchester United to follow this similar path that not only we've done before, but that Christopher Vivell has championed in his career. I'm just going to run through a slightly longer list of some of the players that Christopher Vivell has brought to clubs and then sold for profit. And I'm not just talking a couple of million here and there. I'm talking between 5 and 20 times the value that they were brought in for. When we get to Dominik Szoboszlai in a minute, it is actually crazy the amount of profit that they made and the way that they structured that deal and Szoboszlai's career. Here's the list. Amadou Haidara, Noah Okafor, Mohamed Simakan, David Raum, Patson Daka, Deo Upamecano, Karim Adeyemi, Dominik Szoboszlai, Josko Vardiol, Benjamin Sesko and Erling Haaland, some of the biggest and best players in their positions in the world. And they were brought through for crazy prices by Christopher Vivell. Let's just have a look at Dominik Szoboszlai. This is the model that United should be following. Maybe we don't need to sell them for profit. If they're good enough, they can come into the first team and be top players. But this is how his career was shaped and moulded by Christopher Vivell. Szoboszlai was bought for €500,000 by RB Salzburg from Phoenix Gold in Hungary, where he went immediately on loan to FC Liefering the feeder club, like I mentioned before. Then, as Christopher Vivell left Salzburg and moved to Leipzig himself, he brought Szoboszlai with him, around 36 million euros for that deal, already making huge profit for Salzburg in the process. And admittedly, they are both under the same Red Bull parent company, but it's still a deal that makes money for the first team whilst giving a great player to RB Leipzig. And the maddest thing after that is they went and did it again. When Liverpool activated the 70 million euro release clause of Dominik Szoboszlai last year, they made another 36 million profit for RB Leipzig. This is a player that was brought into this setup for £500,000 and was sold for a total of 106 million euros across 2 transfers. That is the sort of profit that Manchester United have never seen on a player. Even Cristiano Ronaldo, we bought him for 16 million and we sold him for 80. And he was the best player in the world at the time. They've made 100 million across 2 transfers on Dominik Szoboszlai, who, let's be honest, is nowhere near the level of Cristiano Ronaldo. It just makes a lot of sense. And Joško Vardiol is another one, brought in for 18 million and was sold for 90 million euros to Manchester City. Benjamin Sesko is another perfect example. He was brought into FC Salzburg for 2.5 million euros. He was then sold to Leipzig for 24 million euros after, you guessed it, a loan spell at FC Liefering. He is now on the verge of another 60 million plus deal to either Arsenal or another interested club this summer. This is a model that works, and whether that's bringing players in with a view of getting them to the first team like Benjamin Sesko, like Dominik Szoboszlai, or bringing players through that you can then sell for 25 to 35 million pounds. Maybe they're not quite good enough for Manchester United, but maybe someone like Karim Adeyemi, who maybe isn't quite good enough for that top level, but Dortmund spent 38 million euros on him. If Man United can bring in these youngsters and then can either turn a profit or turn them into first-class players, that is a thing that Manchester United have done so little of over the last decade. And it's one of the reasons we've fallen so far behind the likes of Chelsea and Manchester City when it comes to turnover and transfer revenue. And the great thing is we can already see Christopher Vivell's fingerprints on Manchester United's recent transfers. And it's not just him. And I want to make it clear that he isn't running everything behind the scenes at Manchester United. You've got Jason Wilcox, who reportedly has a brilliant eye for talent and is doing a lot of this work himself. You've also got Omar Barada and the Ineos team above him that, of course, have to sanction and come up with the structure and ideas for how Manchester United will execute their transfer policy. But Christopher Vivell has done this. And look what we've seen already. Aidan Heaven from Arsenal. £1 million, 18-year-old, and already looks like he's good enough for Manchester United's first team. You've got Chido Obi, one of the most exciting and deadly young strikers in the world, came in on a free. You've also got Sekou Kone coming over from Mali, which is a place that I don't think I've ever seen United scout someone for. Again, like I said before, potentially now due for a loan to FC Lausanne in Switzerland. And I would even include Patrick Dorgu on this list as well, the 20-year-old coming in from FC Lecce in Italy, a club that I've never seen us buy a player from. He doesn't have some weird connection via the agents or someone that he used to play for to Manchester United. It was a young, talented, up-and-coming player scouted by Manchester United. And you can almost look back to some of those RB Leipzig signings. They let Salzburg do the cheap one, and then Leipzig bring him in for 25 to 30 million euros, and then they develop him from there. It's almost like we've skipped straight to that second transfer with Patrick Dorgu, that 25 to 30 million transfer. But the likes of Heaven and Chido and Sekou Kone, those are ones for the future. And whether they play for Manchester United for the rest of their career or we just sell them for 5 to 20 times what we paid for them, these are good ideas. This is the right way to rebuild Manchester United. I think the next question is, who is he replacing at Manchester United? What has changed that has led to Christopher Vivell being the guy that he is at Manchester United? Well, one of the main names is Tom Keane. And that's a name you might know or you might not know. We spoke about him on the channel a couple of times, and he was the former head of negotiations at Manchester United. And he was there during Erik ten Hag's first summer, the year that we signed Antony and Casemiro for a combined 150 million euros. And by the sounds of it, in an interview that he did with The Overlap, the whole thing was a shambles. He said this: one of the biggest challenges was that everybody was new. I just walked through the door and the manager had come through the door in May. I think John Murtagh had been at the club for a while, but he'd just become football director. Richard Arnold had just become CEO. There was a head of data. So essentially, the way it would normally work for a football club is the transfer window shuts in September, they start planning for the following summer. That's when the work starts. What happened for us that summer was, I think it was the circumstances, the work started in May. So it felt like we had a year's work to do in 12 to 16 weeks. That cannot be the way Manchester United is run. And I don't blame him in particular. He was given that job in May. What's he meant to do? Start 8 months earlier? But the fact that United were allowed to be ran that way, the fact that we were bringing in a whole new team, a new manager, a new CEO, a new technical director, a new head of negotiations, and they were all arriving in May to start work on a summer transfer window. United have already made a signing this summer. The transfer window's only been open for what, 3 days? And United have already made a deal in Matheus Cunha. Bryan Mbeumo is on the way as well. And that year, United were basically starting where we are now. No wonder things were such a shambles. No wonder we wasted so much money and got backed into corners and spent crazy fees on the likes of Antony and Casemiro. It almost makes sense because we put ourselves in the worst possible position. And we wanted to sign instant impact players to take Erik ten Hag up the league. And that is not the way to run a club, especially one like Manchester United that is so far from that top echelon. We needed to build the foundations and build a structure and an identity that will transcend generations and managers and players. If United are signing the best youngsters in the world and we are supplementing that with Premier League proven players, that for me is a recipe for success. That makes sense to me. And Christopher Vivell seems like one of the big names and one of the big reasons United have seen this drastic change in transfer policy. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. How important is this new change? Not just Christopher Vivell, but Jason Wilcox and Omar Barada. And how impressed are you with the start we have seen to this transfer window? The big name players, the likes of Matheus Cunha, but also this clear change in direction from Manchester United. Hit subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We'll see you in a bit.